Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Homes for Story Time, and we're back to continue with our story, A Damsel in Distress. And tonight we begin with chapter 11. George opened the letter with trembling and reverent fingers. Dear Mr. Bevan, thank you so much for your note, which Albert gave to me. How very, very kind. Hey, mister. George looked up testily. The boy Albert had reappeared. What's the matter? Can't you find the cake? I found the cake, rejoined Albert, adducing proof of the statement in the shape of a massive slice, from which he took a substantial bite to assist thought. But I can't find the ginger. I can't find the ginger. George waved him away. This interruption at such a moment was annoying. Look for it, child, look for it. Sniff after it. Bay on its trail. It's somewhere about. Whir, mumbled Albert through the cake. He flicked a crumb off his cheek with a tongue which would have excited the friendly interest of an anteater. I like ginger ale. Well, go and bathe in it. Right. George returned to his letter. Dear Mr. Bevan, thank you ever so much for your note, which Albert gave to me. How very, very kind of you to come here like this and to say, Hey, mister. Good heavens, George glared. What's the matter now? Haven't you found that ginger ale yet? I've found the ginger ale right enough, but I can't find the thing. The thing? What thing? The thing what you open the ginger ale with. Oh, you mean the thing. It's in the middle drawer of the dresser. Use your eyes, my boy. Right. George gave an overwrought sigh and began the letter again. Dear Mr. Bevan, thank you ever so much for your note, which Albert gave to me. How very, very kind of you to come here like this and to say that you would help me. And how clever of you to find me after I was so secretive that day in the cab. You really can help me, if you are willing. It's too long to explain in a note, but I am in great trouble. There is nobody except you to help me. I will explain everything when I see you. The difficulty will be to slip away from the house. They are watching me every moment, I'm afraid. But I will try my hardest to see you very soon. Yours sincerely, Maud Marsh. Just for a moment, it must be confessed, the tone of the letter damped George. He could not have said just what he had expected, but certainly Reggie's revelations had prepared him for something rather warmer, something more in the style in which a girl would write to a man she loved. The next moment, however, he saw how foolish any such expectation had been. How on earth could any reasonable man expect a girl to let herself go out this stage of the proceedings? It was for him to make the first move. Naturally, she wasn't going to reveal her feelings until he had revealed his. George raised the letter to his lips and kissed it vigorously. Hey, mister. George started guiltily. The blush of shame overspread his cheeks. The room seemed to echo with the sound of that fatuous kiss. Kitty, 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 he called, snapping his fingers and repeating the incriminating noise. I was just calling my cat, he explained with dignity. We didn't see her in there, did you? Albert's blue eyes met his in a derisive stare. The lid of the left one fluttered. It was but too plain that Albert was not convinced. A little black cat with white shirt front babbled George perseveringly. She's usually either here or there or somewhere. Kitty, 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 kitty. The cupid's bow of Albert's mouth parted. He uttered one word, swank. There was a tense silence. What Albert was thinking, one cannot say. The thoughts of youth are long, long thoughts. What George was thinking was that the late King Herod had been unjustly blamed for a policy which had been both statesmanlike and in the interest of the public. He was blaming the mawkish sentimentality of the modern legal system, which ranks the evisceration and secret burial of small boys as crime. What do you mean? You know what I mean. I have a good mind to. Albert waved a deprecating hand. It's all right, mister. I'm your friend. You are? Are you? Well, don't let it about. I've got a reputation to keep up. I'm your friend, I tell you. I can help you. I want to help you. George's views on the infanticide underwent a slight modification. After all, he felt much must be excused to youth. Youth thinks it funny to see a man kissing a letter. It is not funny, of course. It is beautiful. But it's no good arguing the point. Let youth have its snigger, provided, after it has finished sniggering, it intends to buckle to and be practical assistance. Albert, as an ally, was not to be despised. George did not know what Albert's duties as a page boy were, but they seemed to be of a nature that gave him plenty of leisure and freedom. And friendly resident of the castle, with leisure and freedom, was just what he needed. That's very good of you, he said, twisting his reluctant features into a fairly benevolent smile. I can help, persisted Albert. Got a cigar root? Do you smoke, child? When I get a hold of a cigarette, I do. I'm sorry, I cannot oblige you. I don't smoke cigarettes. Then I'll have one of my own, said Albert moodily. He reached into the mysteries of his pocket and produced a piece of string, a knife, the wishbone of a fowl, 2 marbles, and a crushed cigarette, and a match, replacing the string, the knife, the wishbone, and the marbles. He ignited the match against the tightest part of his person and lit the cigarette. I can help. I know the ropes. And smoke them, said George, wincing. Pardon? Nothing. But took an enjoyable whiff. I know all about you. You do? You and Lady Maud. You do? What do you know? I was listening at the keyhole while the row was going on. There was a row, was there? A faint smile of retrospective enjoyment lit up Albert's face. An awful row, shouting and yelling and cussing all over the shop about you and Lady Maud. And you drank it in, eh? Pardon? I say, you listened? Not off, I listened. Seeing I'd just drawn you in the sweep strike, of course I listened, not off. George did not follow him here. The sweepstike. What's a sweepstike? Why, a thing you puts names in, arts, and draw 'em, and one's gets the winnings name wins the money. Oh, you mean a sweepstake. That's what I said, a sweepstike. George was still puzzled. But I don't understand. How do you mean you drew me in a sweepstake? I mean a sweepstake. What sweepstake? Down in the servants' hall, Keggs, the butler, started it. I heard him saying he was had won every places, was in as a butler leastways. Whenever there was any daughters of the house, there always was a chance there was a house party of one of the daughters of the house getting married to one of the gents in the party. So Keggs puts all the gents' names in a hat, and you pays 5 shillings for a chance, and the one that draws the winning name gets the money. And if the daughter of the house don't get married that time, the money's put away and added to the pool for the next house party. George gasped. The revelation of life below the stairs in the stately homes of England took his breath away. Then astonishment gave way to indignation. Do you mean to tell me that you worms made Lady Maud the prize of a sweepstake? Albert was hurt. Who you callin' worms? George perceived the need for diplomacy. After all, much descended on this child's goodwill. I was referring to the butler. What's his name? Keggs? He ain't a worm. He's a serpent. Albert drew his cigarette. His brow darkened. He does the drawings, Keg does, and I'd like to know how he's always manages to cop the favorite. Albert chuckled. But this time I'm done with him proper. He didn't want me in the thing at all. Said I was too young. tried to do the drawin' without me. Clip that boy one side of the 'ead, he says, and turn him out, he says. I says, yous will ye? I says, and you what price me goin' to his lordship and blowin' the gaff, I says. He says, oh, all right. He says, I've your own way. Have it your own way, he says. Where's your 5 shillings, he says. 'Ere ye are, I say. Oh, very well, he says. But you won't 'ave to draw last, he says, bein' the youngest. Well, they started drawing the names, and of course Keggs as to draw Mr. Bing. Oh, he drew Mr. Bing, did he? Yes, and everyone knew Reggie was favourite. Smiled all over his fat face, the old serpent did. And when it comes to my turn, he says to me, sorry, Albert, he says, but there ain't no more names. They've give out. Oh, they have they? I says, well, what's the matter with giving a fellow a sporting chance? I say, how do you mean? He says. Why, write me out a ticket marked Mr. X, I says. Then, if her ladyship marries anyone not in the house party, I cop, or all right, he says. But you know the conditions of this 'ere sweep. Nothing don't count, only what takes place during the 2 weeks of the house party, he says. Or all right, I says, write me a ticket. It's a fair sportin' venture. So he writes me a ticket with Mr. X on it. And I says to them all, I says, I'd like to have witnesses, I says, to this 'ere thing. Do you gents agree that if anyone not in the house party and whose name ain't on one of those other tickets marries her ladyship, I get the pool, I says. They all says, that's right. And then I says to them, all right, straight out, I says, I happen to know, I says, that her ladyship's in love with a gent that's not in the party at all. An American gent, I say. They wouldn't believe it at first. But when Keggs had put 2 and 2 together and thought of 1 or 2 things that had happened, he turned as white as a sheet and said it was a swindle and wanted the drawing done over again. But I said the others say no. They says it's quite fair. They says, and one of them offered me 10 bob slap out of my ticket. But I stuck to it, I did. And that concluded Albert throwing the cigarette into the fireplace just in time to prevent a scorched finger. That's why I'm going to help her. I'm going to help you, because it helps me. There is probably no attitude of the mind harder for the average man to maintain than that of aloof disapproval. George was an average man, and during the degrading recital just concluded, he found himself slipping. At first he had revolted, then, in spite of himself, amused, and now, when all the facts were before him, he could induce his mind to think of nothing else than his good fortune in securing as an ally one who appeared to combine precious intelligence with a helpful lack of scruple. War is war and love is love, and in each the practical man inclines to demand from the fellow workers the punch rather than the lofty soul. A page boy replete with the finer things, that is, the finer feelings, would have been useless in this crisis. Albert, who seemed on the evidence of a short but sufficient acquaintance to be a lad who would not recognize the finer feelings if they were handed to him on a plate, with watercress round them, promised to be invaluable. Something in his manner told George that the child was bursting with schemes for his benefit. Have some more cake, Albert? He said ingratiatingly. The boy shook his head. Do, urged George, just a little slice. There ain't no little slice, replied Albert with regret. I've ate it all. He sighed and resumed. I got a scheme. Fine, what is it? Albert knitted his brows. It's like this. You want to see her ladyship, but you can't come to the castle, and she can't come to you, not with her fat brother dodging her footsteps. That's it, ain't it? Or am I a liar? George hastened to reassure him. That is it exactly. What's the answer? I'll tell you what you can do. There's a big ball tonight 'cause of its bein' in Nibs comin' of age tomorrow. All the country'll be 'ere. You think I could slip in and be taken for a guest? Albert snorted contempt. No, I don't think nothing of the kind, not being a fathead, George apologized. But what you could do is this. I 'eard Keggs talkin' to the 'ousekeeper about 'avin' a get in a lot of tempy waiters and 'elp out for the night. George reached forward and patted Albert on the head. Don't mess my hair now, warned the youth coldly. Albert, you're one of the great thinkers of the age. I could get into the castle as a waiter, and you could tell Lady Maud I was there, and we could arrange a meeting. Machiavelli couldn't have thought of anything smoother. Mac who? One of your ancestors. Great schemer in his day. But one moment. Now what? How am I to get engaged? How do I get the job? That'll be all right. I'll tell the housekeeper you're my cousin. Been a waiter in America at the best restaurants. Or something. For holiday. But come in for one night to oblige. They'll pay you a quid. I'll hand it over to you. Just, said Albert approvingly, what I was going to suggest myself. Then I'll leave all the arrangements to you. You'd better if you don't want to make a mess of everything. All you've got to do is come to the servants' entrance at 8 sharp tonight and say you're my cousin. That's an awful thing to ask anyone to say. Pardon? Nothing, said George. Chapter 12. The great ball in honor of Lord Belpher's coming of age was at its height. The reporter of the Belpher Intelligencer and Farmer's Guide, who was present in his official capacity, had been allowed by Butler Keggs to take a peep at the scene through the side door, justly observed in his account of the proceedings next day that the tout ensemble was fairy-like, and described the company as a galaxy of fair women and brave men. The floor was crowded with all that the best and noblest in the country, so that a half brick hurled in any given moment must infallibly have split blue blood. Peers stepped on the toes of knights. Honorables bumped into the spines of baronets. Probably the only titled person in the whole of the surrounding country who was not playing his part in the glittering scene was Lord Marshmoreton, who, on discovering that his private study had been converted into a cloak's room, had retired to bed with a pipe and a copy of Roses Red and Roses White by Emily Ann Mackintosh, Popgood, Cruelly and Company, which he was to discover after he was between the sheets, and it was too late to repair the error, was not, as he had supposed, a triste on his favorite hobby, but a novel, stearine sentimentality, dealing with the adventures of a pure young English girl and an artist named Claude. George, from the shaded seclusion of the gallery, looked down upon the brilliant throng with impatience. It seemed to him that he had been doing this all his life. The novelty of experience had long since ceased to divert him. It was all just like the second act of an old-fashioned musical comedy. Act 2, the ballroom, Grantchester Towers, 1 week later, a resemblance which was heightened for him by the fact that the band had more than once played dead and buried melodies of his own composition, of which he had wearied a full 18 months back. A complete absence of obstacles had attended his intrusion into the castle. A brief interview with a motherly old lady, whom even Albert seemed to treat with respect, and who, it appeared, was Miss Digby, the housekeeper, followed by an even briefer encounter with Keggs, fussy and irritable with responsibility, and even while talking to George, carrying on 2 other conversations on the topics of the moment. And he was past the censors and free for one night, only to add his presence to the chosen inside the walls of Belpher. His duties were to stand in the gallery, and, with the assistance of one of the maids, to minister to the comfort of such of the dancers as should use as a sitting-out place. None had so far made their appearance, the superior attractions of the main floor having exercised a great appeal, and for the past hour George had been alone with the maid and his thoughts, the maid having asked George if he knew her cousin Frank, who had been in America nearly a year, and having received a reply in the negative, seemed to be disappointed in him and to lose interest, and had not spoken for 20 minutes. George scanned the approaches to the balcony for a sight of Albert as the shipwrecked mariner scans the horizon for the passing of sail. It was inevitable, he supposed, this waiting. It would be difficult for Maud to slip away even for a moment on such a night. "I say, laddie, would you mind getting me a lemonade?" George was gazing over the balcony when the voice spoke behind him, and the muscles of his back stiffened as he recognized its genial note. This was one of the things he had prepared for himself. But now that it had happened, he felt a wave of stage fright such as he had only once experienced before in his life, on the occasion when he had been young enough and experienced enough to take a curtain call on a first night. Reggie Byng was friendly, and he would not willfully betray him, but Reggie was also a babbler who could not be trusted to keep anything to himself. It was necessary, he perceived, to take a strong line from the start, and convince Reggie that any likeness which the latter might suppose that he had detected between the companion of that afternoon and the waiter of tonight existed only in his heated imagination. As George turned Reggie's pleasant face pink with a healthful exercise of Lord Marshmoreton's finest Bollinger, lost most of its color. His eyes and mouth opened wider. The fact is, Reggie was shaken. All through the earlier part of the evening he had been sedulously primming himself with stimulants, with a view to amassing enough nerve to propose to Alice Faraday, and now that he had drawn her away from the throng to this secluded nook, and was about to put his fortune to the test, a horrible fear swept over him that he had overdone it. He was having optical illusions. Good God! Reggie loosened his collar and pulled himself together. "Would you mind taking a glass of lemonade to the lady in the blue, sitting at the settee over there by the statue?" he said carefully. He brightened up a little bit. Pretty good, that. Not absolutely a test sentence, perhaps, like truly rural, or the intricacies of the British Constitution, but nevertheless no mean feat. "I say," he continued after a pause, "sir, you haven't ever seen me before, by any chance, if you know what I mean, have you?" "No, sir." "You haven't a brother or anything of that shape or order, have you?" "No." "No, sir. I have often wished I had. I ought to have spoken to father about it. Father could never deny me anything." Reggie blinked. His misgivings returned. Either his ears, like his eyes, were playing him tricks, or else this waiter chappie was talking pure drivel. "What's that, sir?" "What did you say?" "I said, no, sir. I have no brother." "Didn't you say something else?" "No, sir." "What?" "No, sir." Reggie's worst suspicions were confirmed. "Good God!" he muttered. "Then I am." Miss Faraday, when he joined her on the settee, wanted an explanation. "What were you talking to that man about, Mr. Byng? You seem to be having a very interesting conversation." "I was asking him if he had a brother." Miss Faraday glanced quickly at him. She had a feeling for some time that evening that his manner had been strange. "A brother? What made you ask him that?" That is to say, what I mean is, he looked like the sort of chap who might have a brother. Lots of those fellows have." Alice Faraday's face took a motherly look. She was fonder of Reggie than that lovesick youth supposed, and by sheer accident he had stumbled on the right road to her consideration. Alice Faraday was one of those girls whose dream it is to be a ministering angel to some chosen man, to be a good influence to him, and to raise him to an appreciation of nobler things. Hitherto, Reggie's personality had seemed to her agreeable, but negative, a positive vice, like overindulgence in alcohol, altered him completely. It gave him a significance. I told him to get you a lemonade, said Reggie. He seemed to be taking his time about it. Hi. George approached deferentially. Sir, where's the lemonade? Lemonade, sir? Didn't I ask you to bring this lady a glass of lemonade? I did not understand you to do so, sir. But, great Scott, what were you chatting about then? You were telling me a diverting story about an Irishman who landed in New York looking for work, sir. You would like a glass of lemonade, sir? Very good, sir. Alice placed a hand gently on Reggie's arm. Don't you think you had better lie down for a little and rest, Mr. Bing? I'm sure it would do you good. The solicitous note in her voice made Reggie quiver like a jelly. He had never known her to speak like that before. For a moment he was inclined to lay bare his soul, but his nerve was broken. He did not want her to mistake the outpouring of a strong man's heart for the irresponsible ravings of a too hearty dinner or diner. It was one of life's ironies. Here he was for the first time, all keyed up to go right ahead, and he couldn't do it. It's the heat of the room, said Alice. Shall we go and sit outside on the terrace? Never mind about the lemonade. I'm not really thirsty. Reggie followed her like a lamb. The prospect of cool night air was grateful. That, murmured George, as he watched them depart, ought to hold you for a while. He perceived Albert hastening towards him. Chapter 13. Albert was in a hurry. He skimmed over the carpet like a water beetle. Quick, he said. He cast a glance at the maid, George's co-worker. She was reading a novelette with her back turned. Tell her you'll be back in 5 minutes, said Albert, jerking a thumb. Unnecessary. She won't notice my absence. Ever since she discovered that I had never met her cousin Frank in America, I have meant nothing in her life. Then come on. Where? I'll show you. That is not the nearest and most direct route which they took to the trysting place. George became aware after he had followed this young guide through doors and upstairs and downstairs and had at last come to a halt in a room to which the sound of music penetrated but faintly. He recognized the room. He had been in it before. It was the same room where he and Billy Dorry had listened to Keggs telling the story of Lord Leonard and his leap. That window there, he remembered now, opened onto the very balcony from which the historic Leonard had done his spectacular dive. That it should be the scene of this other secret meeting struck George as appropriate. The coincidence appealed to him. Albert vanished. George took a deep breath. Now that the moment had arrived for which he had waited so long, he was aware of a return of that feeling of stage fright which had come upon him when he heard Reggie Bing's voice. This sort of thing, it must be remembered, was not in George's usual line. His had been a quiet, uneventful life. The only exciting thing which, in his recollection, had ever happened to him previous to the dramatic entry of Lady Maud into his taxicab that day in Piccadilly had occurred at college nearly 10 years before, when a festive roommate, no doubt with the best motives, had placed a Mexican horned toad in his bed on the night of the Yale football game. A light footstep sounded outside, and the room whirled round George in a manner which, if it had happened to Reggie Bing, would have caused that injudicious drinker to abandon the habits of a lifetime. When the furniture had returned to its place and the rug had ceased to spin, Maud was standing before him. Nothing is harder to remember than a once-seen face. It had caused George a good deal of distress and inconvenience, that try as he might, he could not conjure up anything more than a vague vision of what the only girl in the world really looked like. He had carried away with him from the meeting in the cab only a confused recollection of eyes that shone and a mouth that curved in a smile, and the brief moment in which he was able to refresh his memory, when he found her in the lane with Reggie Byng and the broken down car, had not been enough to add definiteness. The consequence was that Maud came upon him now with the stunning effect of beauty seen for the first time. He gasped. In that dazzling ball dress, with the flush of dancing on her cheeks and the light of dancing in her eyes, she was so much more wonderful than any picture of which her memory had been able to produce for his inspection, that it was as if he had never seen her before. Even her brother Percy, a stern critic, where his nearest and dearest were concerned, had admitted on meeting her in the drawing room before dinner that that particular dress suited Maud. It was a shimmering dream thing of rose leaves and moonbeams. That at least was how it struck George. A dressmaker would have found a longer or less romantic description for it, but that does not matter. Whoever wishes for a cold and technical catalogue of the stuffs of which went in to make up the picture that deprived George of speech may consult the files of Belfer Intelligencer and Farmer's Guide, and read the report of the editor's wife, who does the dresses for the Intelligencer under the pen name of Bertie Bright Eye. As far as George was concerned, the thing was made of rose leaves and moonbeams. George, as I say, was deprived of speech. That any girl could possibly look so beautiful was enough to paralyze his faculties. But that this ethereal being, straight from fairyland, could have stooped to love him, an earthly brute, who wore sock suspenders and drank coffee for breakfast, that was what robbed George of the power to articulate. He could do nothing but look at her. From the hills of fairyland soft music came, or, if we must be exact, Maud spoke. I couldn't get away before. Then she stopped short and darted to the door, listening. Was that somebody coming? I had to cut a dance with Mr. Plummer to get over here. And I'm so afraid he may. He had. A moment later, it was only too evident that this was precisely what Mr. Plummer had done. There was a footstep on the stairs, a heavy footstep this time, and from the outside the voice of the pursuer made itself heard. "Oh, there you are, Lady Maud. I was looking for you. This is our dance." George did not know who Mr. Plummer was. He did not know and did not want to know. His only thought regarding Mr. Plummer was a passionate realization of the superfluity of his existence. It is the presence on the globe of these plumbers that delays the coming of the millennium. His stunned mind leaped into sudden activity. He must not be found here, that is certain. Waiters who ramble at large about a feudal castle and are discovered in a conversation with the daughter of the house excite comment, and conversely, daughters of the house who talk in secluded rooms with waiters also find explanations necessary. He must withdraw. He must withdraw quickly, and as a gesture from Maud indicated, the withdrawal must be effected through the French window opening onto the balcony. Estimating the distance that separated him from the approaching Plummer at 3 stairs, the voice had come from below, and a landing, the space of time allotted to him by a hustling fate for disappearing, was some 4 seconds, inside 2.5. The French window had opened and closed, and George was out under the stars, with the cool winds of the night playing on his heated forehead. He had now time for meditation. There are few situations which provided more scope for meditation than that of a man pinned up on a small balcony a considerable distance from the ground, with his only avenue of retreat cut off behind him. So George meditated. First, he mused on Plummer. He thought some hard thoughts about Plummer. Then he brooded on the unkindness of a fortune which had granted him the opportunity of this meeting with Maud, only to snatch it away almost before it had begun. He wondered how long the late Lord Leonard had been permitted to talk on that occasion before he, too, had to retire through these same windows. There was no doubt about one thing. Lovers who chose that room for their interviews seemed to have a very seemed to have very little luck. It had not occurred to George at first that there could be any further disadvantage attached to this position other than the obvious drawbacks which had already come to his notice. He was now to perceive that he had been mistaken. A voice was speaking in the room he had just left, a plainly audible voice, a deep and throaty, and within a minute George had become aware that he was to suffer an additional discomfort of being obliged to listen to a fellow man one could call Plummer, that by stretching the facts a little, proposing marriage. The gruesomeness of the situation became intensified. Of all moments when a man, and justice compelled George to admit that Plummer was technically human, of all moments when a man may by all the laws of decency demand to be alone without an audience of his own sex, the chiefest of is in the moment when he is asking a girl to marry him. George's was a sensitive nature, and he withheld at the thought of playing the eavesdropper at such a time. He looked frantically about him for a means of escape. Plummer had now reached the stage of saying at great length that he was not worthy of Maud. He said it over and over again in different ways. George was in hearty agreement with him, but he did not want to hear it. He wanted to get away, but how? Lord Leonard, on a similar occasion, had leaped. Some might argue, therefore, on the principle of that man and what he had done, man can do that again, that George should have imitated him. But men do differ. There was a man attached to a circus who used to dive off the roof of the Madison Square Garden onto a sloping board, strike it with his chest, turn a couple of somersaults, reach the ground, bow 6 times, and go off to lunch. That sort of thing is a gift. Some of us have it, and some have not. George had not. Painful as it was to hear Plummer floundering through his proposal of marriage, instinct told him that it would be far more painful to hurl himself out into midair onto the sporting chance of having his downward progress arrested by the branches of a big tree that had upheld Lord Leonard. No, there seemed nothing for it but to remain where he was. Inside the room, Plummer was now saying how much the marriage would please his mother. Psst! George looked about him. It seemed to him that he had heard a voice. He listened. No, except for the barking of a distant dog, the faint wailing of a waltz, the rustle of a roosting bird, the sound of Plummer saying that if her refusal was due to anything she might have heard about that breach of promise case of his a couple of years ago, he would like to state that he was more sinned against than sinning, and that the girl had absolutely misunderstood him. All was still. Psst! Hey, mister! It was a voice. It came from above. Was it an angel's voice? Not altogether. It was Albert's. The boy was leaning out of a window some 6 feet higher than the castle wall. George, his eyes by now grown used to the darkness, perceived that the stripling gesticulated as one having some message to impart. Then, glancing to one side, he saw what looked like some kind of a rope swayed against a wall. He reached for it. The thing was not a rope. It was a knotted sheet. From above, Albert's hoarse whisper, "Look alive!" This was precisely what George wanted to do for at least another 50 years or so. And it seemed to him, as he stood there in the starlight, gingerly fingering his flimsy linen thing, that if he were to spend his 180 pounds of bone and sinew at the end of it over the black gulf outside of the balcony, he would look alive for about 5 seconds. And after that, goodness only knows who and how he would look. He knew all about knotted sheets. He had read 100 stories in which heroes, heroines, low comedy people, and even villains did all sorts of reckless things with their assistants. There was not much comfort to be derived from that. It was one thing to read about people doing silly things like that, quite another to do them yourself. He gave Albert's sheet a tentative shake. In all his experience, he thought he had never come across anything so supremely unstable. One calls it Albert's sheet for sake of convenience. It was really Reggie Bing's sheet. And when Reggie got into his room in the small hours of the morning and found the thing a mass of knots, he jumped to the conclusion, being a simple-hearted young man, that his bosom friend Jack Ferris, who had come up from London to see Lord Belpher through the trying experience of coming-of-age party, had done it as a practical joke, and went and poured a jug of water over Jack's bed. That's life. Just one long succession of misunderstandings and rash acts and what not. Absolutely. Albert was becoming impatient. He was in the position of a great general who thinks out some wonderful piece of strategy and can't get his army to carry it out. Many boys, seeing Plummer enter the room below and listening at the keyhole, and realizing George must have hidden somewhere, and deducing that he must be out on the balcony, would have been baffled as to how to proceed. Not Albert. To dash up to Reggie Bing's room and strip the sheet off the bed and tie the bed to the bedpost and fashion a series of knots in it and lower it out to the window took Albert about 3 minutes. His part in the business had been performed without a hitch, and now George, who had nothing in the world to do but the childish task of climbing up the sheet, was jeopardizing the success of the whole scheme by delay. Albert gave the sheet an irritable jerk. It was the worst thing he could have done. George had almost made up his mind to take a chance when the sheet was snatched from the grasp as if it had been some live thing deliberately eluding his clutch. The thought of what would have happened had this occurred when it was in midair caused him to break out in a cold perspiration. He retired a pace and perched himself on the rail of the balcony. "Psst," said Albert. "It's no good saying pissed," rejoined George in an annoyed undertone. "I could say pissed. Any fool could say pissed." Albert, he considered, in leaning out the window and saying, "Psst, I was merely touching the fringe of the subject." It is probable that he would have remained seated on the balcony rail regarding the sheet with cold aversion indefinitely, had his hand not been forced by the man Plummer. Plummer, during these last minutes, had shot his bolt. He had said everything a man could say, much of it twice over, and now he was through. All was ended. The verdict was in. No wedding bells for Plummer. "I think," said Plummer gloomily, and the words smote on George's ear like knell, "I think I'd like a little air." George leaped from his rail like a hunted grasshopper. If Plummer was going for air, it meant he was going to come out to the balcony. There was only one thing to be done. It probably meant the abrupt conclusion of a promising career, but he could not hesitate any longer. George grasped the sheet. It felt like a rope of cobwebs, and swung himself out. Maud looked out the balcony. Her heart, which had stood still when the rejected one opened the window and stepped forth to commune with the soothing stars, beat again. There was no one there, only emptiness and Plummer. "This," said Plummer somberly, gazing over the rail into the darkness, "is the place where that fellow, what's his name, jumped off in the reign of the Thingamy, isn't it?" Maud understood now that the thrill of the pursuit of admiration for George's heroism swept over her. So rather than compromise her, he had taken a dangerous choice. He had done the Leonard's leap. How splendid of him! If George, now sitting on Reggie Bing's bed, taking a rueful census of the bits of skin remaining on his hands and knees after his climb, could have read her thoughts, he would have felt well rewarded for his abrasions. "I've a jolly good mind," said Plummer, "to do it myself." He uttered a short, mirthless laugh. "Well, anyway," he said recklessly, "I'll jolly well go downstairs and have a brandy and a soda." Albert finished untying the sheet from the bedpost and stuffed it under a pillow. "And now," said Albert, "for a quiet smoke in the scullery. These massive minds require their moments of relaxation." Chapter 14. George's idea was to get home, quick. There was no possible chance of a second meeting with Maud that night. They had met and had been whirled asunder. No use to struggle with fate. Best to give in and hope for another time. Fate would be kinder. What George wanted was to be away from all the gay glitter and fairy-like tout ensemble and the galaxy of fair women and brave men, safe in his own easy chair, where nothing could happen to him. A nice sense of duty would, no doubt, have taken him back to his post in order to fully earn the sovereign which had been paid to him for his services as a temporary waiter. But the voice of duty called him again in vain. If the British aristocracy desired refreshments, let them get them for themselves, and like it, he was through. But if George had, for the time being, been done with British aristocracy, the British aristocracy had not been done with him. Hardly had he reached for the hall when he encountered one of the members of the order whom he would most gladly have avoided. Lord Belpher was not in a genial mood. Late hours always made his head ache, and he was not a dancing man, so that he was by now fully as weary of the fairy-like tout ensemble as was George. But, being the center of the cause of the night's proceedings, he was compelled to be present to the finish. He was in the position of captains who must be last to leave their ships, and of boys who stand on burning decks whence all but they had fled. He had spent several hours shaking hands with total strangers and receiving with a frozen smile their felicitations on the attainment of his majority, and he could not have been called upon to meet a larger horde of relations than had surged round him that night if he had been a rabbit. The Belpher connection was wide, straggling over most of England, and first cousins, second cousins, and even third and fourth cousins had debauched from practically every county of the map and marched upon the home of their ancestors. The effort of having to be civil to all of these who had told upon Percy, like the heroine of his sister Maud's favorite poem, he was aweary, and he wanted a drink. He regarded George's appearance as exceedingly opportune. "Get me a small bottle of champagne, and bring it to the library." "Yes, sir." The two words sounded innocent enough, but, wishing as he did not efface himself to avoid publicity, they were the most unfortunate which George could have chosen. If he had merely bowed acquiescence and departed, it is probable that Lord Belpher would not have taken a second look at him. Percy was in no condition to subject anyone he met to a minute scrutiny, but when you have been addressed for an entire lifetime as your lordship, it startles you when a waiter calls you sir. Lord Belpher gave George a glance in which reproof and pain were nicely mingled, emotions quickly supplanted by amazement. A gurgle escaped him. "Stop!" he cried as George turned away. Percy was rattled. The crisis found him in two minds. On the one hand, he would have been prepared to stake an oath that this man before him was the man who had knocked off his hat in Piccadilly. The likeness had struck him like a bow, and like a blow from a bow, the moment he had taken a good look at the fellow. On the other hand, there is nothing which is more likely to lead one astray than the resemblance he had never forgotten, the horror, the humiliation of the occasion, which had happened in his 14th year, when a motherly woman at Paddington Station had called him dearie and publicly embraced him, on the erroneous supposition that he was her nephew Philip. He must proceed cautiously. A brawl with an innocent waiter, coming on the heels of an infernal episode with the policeman, would give people the impression that assailing the lower orders had become a hobby of his. "Sir," said George politely. His brazen front shook Lord Belpher's confidence. "I haven't seen you before here, have I?" was all he could find to say. "No, sir," replied George smoothly. "I am only temporarily attached to the castle staff. Where do you come from?" "America, sir." Lord Belpher started. "America?" "Yes, sir. I am in England on vacation. My cousin Albert is the page boy at the castle, and he told me there were a few vacancies for extra help tonight, so I applied and was given the job." Lord Belpher frowned perplexedly. It all sounded entirely plausible and, what was satisfactory, the statement could be checked by application to Keggs, the butler, and yet there was a lingering doubt. However, there seemed nothing to be gained by continuing the conversation. "I see," he said at last. "Well, bring the champagne to the library as quick as you can." "Very good, sir." Lord Belpher remained where he stood, brooding. Reason told him he ought to be satisfied, but he was not satisfied. It would have been different had he not known that this fellow with whom Maud had been entangled was in the neighborhood, and if that scoundrel had the audacity to come and take a cottage at a castle gate, why not the audacity to invade the castle itself? The appearance of the footman on his way through the hall with a tray gave him the opportunity to further investigate. "Send Keggs to me." "Very good, your lordship." In an interval, the butler arrived. Unlike Lord Belpher, late hours were no hardship to Keggs. He was essentially a night blooming flower. His brow was as free from wrinkles as his shirt front. He bore himself with the conscious dignity of one who, while he would have freely admitted he did not actually own the castle, was nevertheless aware that he was one of its most conspicuous ornaments. "You wish to see me, your lordship?" "Yes, Keggs. There are a number of outside men helping here tonight, aren't there?" "Indubitably, your lordship. The unprecedented scale of the entertainment necessitated the engagement of a certain number of supernumeraries," replied Keggs, with an easy fluency which Reggie Byng, now cooling his head on the lower terrace, would have bitterly envied. In the circumstances, such an arrangement was inevitable. "You engaged all these men yourself?" "In a manner of speaking, your lordship, and for all practical purposes, yes. Mrs. Digby, the housekeeper, conducted the actual negotiations in many cases, but the arrangement was in no instance considered complete until I passed each applicant. Do you know anything of an American who says he is the cousin of the page boy?" "The boy Albert did introduce a nominee whom he stated to be his cousin from New York on a visit, and anxious to oblige. I trusted he is given no dissatisfaction, your lordship." "He seemed a respectable young man." "No, no, not at all. I merely wished to know if you knew him. One can't be too careful." "No, indeed, your lordship." "That's all, then. Thank you, your lordship." Lord Belpher was satisfied. He had also been relieved. He felt that prudence and a steady head had kept him from making a terrible and ridiculous mistake. When George presently returned with the life-saving fluid, he thanked him and turned his thoughts to other things. But if the young master was satisfied, Keggs was not. Upon Keggs a bright light had shone. There were few men, he flattered himself, who could more readily put two and two together and bring the sum to a correct answer. Keggs knew of the strange American gentleman who had taken up his abode at the cottage down by Platt's farm. His looks, his habits, and his motives for coming here had formed food for discussion throughout one meal in the servants' hall. A stranger whose abstention from brush and palette showed him to be no artist, being an object of interest, and, while the solution put forward by a romantic lady's maid, a great reader of novelettes, that the young man had come there to cure himself of some unhappy passion by communing with nature, had been scoffed at by the company. Keggs had not been so sure that there might not be something in it. Later events had deepened his suspicion, which now, after this interview with Lord Belpher, had become certainty. The extreme fishiness of Albert's sudden production of a cousin from America was so manifest that only his preoccupation at the moment when he met the young man could have prevented him from seeing it before. His knowledge of Albert told him that if one so versed as that youth in the art of swank had really possessed a cousin in America, he would long ago have been boring the servants' hall with fictions about the man's wealth and importance. For Albert not to lie about such a thing practically proved that the thing was non-existent. Such was a simple creed of Kegg's. He accosted a passing fellow server. Seen a young blighted Albert anywhere, Freddie? It was in this shameful manner that the mastermind was habitually referred to below the stairs. Seen him going into the scullery not 'arf a minute ago, replied Freddie. Thanks, so long, said Freddie. Be good, returned Keggs, whose mode of speech among those of his own world differed substantially from that which he considered it to become him to employ when conversing with the titled. The fall of great men is but too often due to the failure of their miserable bodies to give the necessary support to their great brains. There are some, for example, who say that Napoleon would have won the Battle of Waterloo if he had not had dyspepsia. Not otherwise was it with Albert on the present occasion. The arrival of Keggs found him at a disadvantage. He had been imprudent enough on leaving George to endeavor to smoke a cigar, purloined from the box which stood hospitably open on a table in the hall. But for this, who knows with what cunning counterattacks he might have foiled the butler's onslaught. As it was, the battle was a walkover for the enemy. "I've been looking for you, young blighted Albert," said Keggs coldly. Albert turned a green but defiant face to the foe. "Go and broil your head," he said. "Never mind about my head. If I was to do my duty to you, I'd give you a clip-side your head. That's what I'd do." "And then bury it in the woods," added Albert, wincing as the consequences of his rash act through his small form like some nauseous tidal wave. He shut his eyes. It upset him to see Keggs shimmering like that. A shimmering butler is an awful sight. Keggs laughed a hard laugh. "You and your cousins from America? Ha ha ha! What about my cousins from America? Yes, what about them? That's just what Lord Belpher and me have been asking ourselves. I don't know what you're asking, or what you're talking about. Will you soon will, young blighted Albert? You sneaked that American fellow into the house to meet Lady Maud. I never. Think I didn't see through all your little games? Why, I knew it from the first. Yes, you did. Then you did let him into the palace." Keggs snorted triumphantly. "Ha! There. You admit it. It was that feller." Too late, Albert saw his false move. A move which, in a normal state of health, he would have scorned to make, just as Napoleon's minus a stomach ache would have scorned the blunder that sent his cuirassiers plunging to destruction in the sunken road. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Well," said Keggs, "I haven't time to stand here chatting with you. I must be going to his lordship and tell him of the horrid trick you've played on him." A second spasm shook Albert to the core of his being. The double assault was too much for him. Betrayed by the body, the spirit yielded. "You wouldn't do that, Mr. Keggs." There was a white flag in every syllable. "I would if I did my duty. But you don't care about that," urged Albert ingratiatingly. "I'll have to think it over," mused Keggs. "I don't want to be hard on a young boy." He struggled silently with himself. Ruining his prospects and all. An inspiration seemed to come to him. "All right, young blighted Albert," he said briskly. "I'll go against my better nature this once and chance it. And now, young feller, me lad, you just and over that ticket of yours. You know the one I'm alludin' to. That ticket you had at the sweep with the one ticket on Mr. X written on it. Albert's indomitable spirit triumphed for a moment over his stricken body. That's likely ain't it. Keggs sighed, the sigh of a good man who has done his best to help a fellow being and has been baffled by the other's perseverity. Just as you please, he said sorrowfully, but I did hope I shouldn't have to go to his lordship and tell him how you've deceived him. Albert capitulated. You are. A piece of paper changed hands. It's men like you what led the arf crime in the country. Much obliged, me lad. You'd walk a mile in the snow, would you? Continued Albert, pursuing his train of thought, to rob a starving beggar of half a penny. Who's robbing anyone? Don't you talk so quick, young man. I'm doing the right thing by you. You can't have my ticket. Marked Reggie Bing that it's a fair exchange, and no one's worse. Far lot good that is. That is as it may be. Anyhow, there it is. Keggs prepared to withdraw. You're too young to have all that money, Albert. You wouldn't know what to do with it. It wouldn't make you happy. There's other things in the world besides winning sweepstakes. And, properly speaking, you ought never to have been allowed to draw at all, being so young. Albert groaned hollowly. When you've all finished talking, I wished you'd kindly have the goodness to leave me alone. I'm not myself. That, said Keggs cordially, is a bit of luck for you, my boy. Accept my earnest felicitations. Defeat is a test of a great man. Your true general is not he who rides to triumph on the tide of an easy victory, but the one who, when crushed to earth, can bend himself to the task of planning methods of rising again. Such a one was Albert, the page boy. Observe the Albert in this attic bedroom. Scarcely more than an hour later, his body was practically ceased to trouble. That is, to trouble him, and his soaring spirit has come to its own again, with the exception of a now very occasional spasm. His physical anguish had passed, and he is thinking, and thinking hard, on the chest of drawers in his grubby envelope, addressed in an ill-formed hand to R. Bing, Esquire. On a sheet of paper, soon to be placed in an envelope, are written the same hand in these words: Do not despair. Remember, Fonte heart, never won fair lady. I shall watch your future progress with considerable interest. Your well-wisher. The last sentence is not original. Albert's Sunday school teacher said it to Albert on the occasion of his taking up his duties at the castle, and it stuck in his memory. Fortunately, for it expressed exactly what Albert wished to say. From now on, Reggie Bing's progress with the Lady Maud Marsh was to be the thing nearest to Albert's heart. And George, meanwhile, little knowing how fate has changed in a flash an ally into an opponent, he is standing at the edge of the shrubbery near the castle gate. The night is very beautiful. The barked spots on his hands and knees are hurting much less now, and he is full of long, sweet thoughts. He has just discovered the extraordinary resemblance which had not struck him as he was climbing up the knotted sheets, between his own position and that of the hero of Tennyson's Maud, a poem to which he has always been partially addicted, and never more so than during the days since he learned the name of the only possible girl. When he has not been playing golf, Tennyson's Maud has been his constant companion. And so it reads: Queen Rose of the rosebud garden of girls, come hither, the dances are done, in a glass of satin and glimmer pearls. Queen Lily and Rose in one, shine out, little head, sunning over the curls. to the flowers and be their sun. The music from the ballroom flows out to him through the motionless air. The smell of sweet earth and growing things is everywhere. And the poem continues. Come into the garden, Maud, for the black bat night hath flown. Come into the garden, Maud, I am here at the gate alone, and the woodbine spices are wafted abroad, and the musk of the rose is blown. He draws a deep breath, misled young man. The night is very beautiful. It is near the dawn now, and in the bushes live things are beginning to stir and whisper. Maud! Surely she can hear him. Maud! The silver stars look down dispassionately. This sort of thing had no novelty for them. And that, my friends, is the end of our reading for tonight. We will continue the next time with chapter 15. But for now, we end. Love to you all. This has been Indiana Holmes for Storytime.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.